Welcome. In this tutorial I talk about the new workflows and enhancements in the integrated motion tracker of Maxon Cinema 4D Release 20. In this great example by the talented artist Jonas Pilz, you can see which incredible VFX shots you can build inside of Cinema 4D. We will use now the same footage Jonas has used, and I will walk you through the process of tracking and the scene reconstruction of this shot. After that, you can start placing your own assets and make your own version. But let's first talk about Jonas. Before Jonas joined Maxon in 2015 as a Cinema 4D evangelist, he worked 4 years as a 3D generalist for designated industry clients and television. You can meet Jonas in person on Maxon trade shows and other public events where he shares his enthusiasm about Maxon Cinema 4D. Before we dive into the tutorial itself, I want to make a brief introduction of myself. My name is Helge and I'm a Maxon certified lead instructor. I work now since 18 years in the industry as a 3D and VFX trainer for my company PixelTrain. You'll find more information about me and my trainings on pixeltrain.de. So let's get started. Motion tracking is normally the first step in a VFX production, because if you want to integrate CG content and real footage, the Cinema 4D camera has to match exactly the movement of the real camera on set. You can use external specialized software for this, or you can use the inbuilt Cinema 4D motion tracker. The Cinema 4D integrated motion tracker has evolved a lot in the last versions, and now we have a really powerful integrated solution. Cinema 4D's camera tracker is able to make automatic or supervised or sometimes named manual tracking. You can use it for object tracking, point cloud generation, and also scene reconstruction. The focus in this release, the R20 release, was a better user experience and a more consistent Cinema 4D workflow for the tracker. But keep in mind, this here is not a full introduction to motion tracking in Cinema 4D. So if you want to learn more about it, you will find a whole bunch of good tutorials around the web and also on the PixelTrain Vimeo channel. Let's get started to explore the cool new workflow enhancements with this project by Jonas. We want to load now the footage, and to make it more convenient for you, we switch now here into our new motion tracker layout. Instead of going to the menu now all the time, you can use this nice layout here. The most important buttons we have here in the bottom part, we have here our object manager, and we have a new motion tracker view and our attributes manager. And now we can start. And instead of adding a motion tracker object here, loading then the footage and so on, we have here now a little assistant. We can double click to create a new motion tracker object. We do that, double click. And then we have here our new motion tracker object, and normally I see my trainings attendees that they now search for the right tab and so on. And now you see we get a new command here, double click to select the footage. Okay, we do that, another double click, and now I can search for my footage here in my files. I take this footage here from Jonas and I'm done. You see how easy it is now in this new version, 2 double clicks. So let's take a look here around, and I adjust a little bit my UI. And if you want to see now the whole plate, we have now our first new feature. Do you see the yellow border here around our footage? This here is the new 2D tracks mode. You can switch it on and off with this little button here. You see the yellow line appears and disappears. If you are in this mode now here, you can navigate now in your plate with your normal Cinema 4D navigation. So I hold down the Option or Alt key on my keyboard and use my 3-button mouse, but you also can use the 1 and the 2 key on your keyboard like you want. Also, if you want to go back to have a footage scale of 100% and you want to reset the footage offset, you can now use your keyboard shortcut H like you do in other viewports inside of Cinema 4D. That's cool. You will see that these workflow enhancements are really useful because now you can use your normal keyboard shortcuts also here in the motion tracker. The next step we want to do is we have to cache our footage. And for this, we now dive a little bit into the attributes here of the footage tab. This plate here is a full HD plate, and you see that here under dimensions. You see it's full HD. But this image here looks a little bit blurry, and the reason for that is that Cinema 4D has to hold the whole footage in memory while tracking. And depending on your plate size, for example, if you have 4K plates or bigger, this will be a problem. And so Cinema 4D is clever enough to resample the footage. And you can insert here under resampling how you want to resample it. Now we see only 30% of the footage, and you see here the size. It's really low, and that's the reason why it looks so blurry. So if you have a good beefy machine and you want to have more details for the tracker, you can increase the resampling here. I go here to 75%, for example, and you see instantly here the image is much better. I see more details, but you also see that here the complete memory consumption, if I cache everything, is much bigger, but it's okay for my machine. To get now rid of stuff you don't need, you can scrub now around here and take a look through the footage, and I don't want to see, for example, here the area bigger than 240, for example. And instead of going out into an external application, you can use here frame start and frame stop, and I change here the value like this, and I also change here my timeline so that it loops always in this area here. If you now want to cache this, and this is a tip from my trainings, because I want to work later fast, and if you now want, for example, to start directly the 2D tracking with a manual process, Cinema has to cache and track at the same time. It takes more time, and so I normally, after I've changed here the values, I go in here and press the play button here, and then you see Cinema now starts caching these frames, so I can now see the footage, I can think about the footage, what are good points to track, in which region I have to be careful because I have moving elements, I have far away elements, where I have patterns which can cause trackers to jump and so on. So this is also, beside the caching, my analyze pass. And now I understand my footage. I see we have a full perspective and we can track it really easily later. Now let's stop that here and we play back. And the normal process of a 3D tracker is that we start in the 2D world, because the only thing the tracking algorithm does is it analyzes perspective. So we need parallax, and for parallax we need a 2D track before that. And for this we have the 2D tracking area. And if you switch now here, you have some options. You can go the full automatic way, or you can go the manual tracking way. I will show you both in this tutorial. But first, let's talk about these trackers. We use a whole bunch of trackers. If you ever done a 2D track in After Effects, you maybe use 4 for a corner pin. Here, this tracker, because it has to understand the full perspective and the parallax, we use 300 trackers here, and it's a really nice thing that Cinema's tracker is doing the job for me. To see where the trackers are normally placed, you can use this Create Auto Tracks. I normally name this a half automatic way. You will see that in a moment. So if you click now here, you get around 300 trackers. And to see this a little bit better, I tend here to go to the footage, and under the visibility settings, I lower the brightness so that you can see where are the trackers placed. And if you ever learned what a 3D tracker does, you know where are good tracks, where are bad tracks. And if you want, you can now analyze that. You can start changing trackers here. You can delete them. And this is the thing which is enhanced now in this version of Cinema 4D. You can now use all your selection tools directly here from the menu. So you can select, for example, here a lasso selection. And if you now go around trackers and you want to delete them, select them and press the delete key on your keyboard. Also, you can use here the rectangle selection now and your live selection and so on. So it's really like Cinema 4D. If you hold down your middle mouse button, you can change here the radius and you can draw over these trackers and also delete them if you like. Then I normally go back here to the move tool, and you will see in a moment why. So this is the first step. You can first create some auto trackers and then you can play with them. But I said it's a half automatic track. What you normally do if you have generated your trackers and you have decided what you want to do, you can track them now forward, backward or bidirectional. But if you have started with your own trackers here, Cinema 4D doesn't add lost tracks. You see, this is grayed out. The reason for this is in this half automatic approach, we normally search for the best frames in a whole shot. You make your tracks, you sort them, you track them bidirectional, for example, and then you close only the gaps more and more. But that's not the topic of this tutorial. What I want to demonstrate you are the options which you find here. So I delete the auto tracks again, and if we now go again here to create auto tracks, you see that the distribution of these tracks is really uniform over the whole plate. If you think about where you normally want to place tracks, some people say, where the contrast is highest. But sometimes this area is really small, so maybe all the high contrast tracks would be here, and if now Cinema 4D only places tracker where the high contrast is, you don't get a good solve because you need the whole plate in mind for getting a solve. So you search for high contrast, but also you want to spread your tracks out, and for this we have this minimum spacing here of 19. If I delete all the tracks and I remove this value, I set this to 0 and say create auto tracks, you will see you get these clumps of trackers, which is not really good. So normally you search for good tracking points and also you spread them over the plate. This value of 19 is really good with HD plates. You will see this HD plate here gets a really nice distribution. If you have a bigger plate, you can also increase this value, and you can check this with this process here, which I've shown you how to place them. Also, 300 trackers takes a long time to track. I tend, in easy shots like this here, to use lower numbers of tracks. Maybe we can try 150 only. This will look like that, and maybe this is enough. I need some more on this face, and for this we can look into another feature which is also now enhanced inside of Cinema 4D R20, and this is the mask workflow. If you want to tell the system where it should place trackers and where it doesn't have to place trackers, you can use masks. And for drawing mask, you can now use this button here. Before it was here in the menu. Create mask, and now you can click your mask. For example, I want to tell the system that I want only have trackers here on this statue. If you now click here around, you see it's really easy now to click. You also can place it outside, but the point is then directly projected. You see it like that. And we take this area and then we close it. You see, it's really like in a drawing program. And after that, we get this mask constraint. And if you now want to change the points in the mask, normally you have to animate them. Then you see how cool these new enhancements inside of Cinema 4D R20 are. So you can now use, like before, your move tool and move the points around. This is really easy. But you also can use, if you are inside of the mask, Control A for selecting all of the points now. And then you can use your normal move tool to move the whole mask now around. You don't need to move the points point by point anymore. You also can now scale a mask and you can rotate a mask. You see, really like in other tools of Cinema 4D. The mask workflow normally is animated, so you first start with a simple mask. Sometimes you stack masks on each other, so it's much easier later if you rotate it like that, and then you move now, you time slider a little bit, and because all of my points are now selected, I can move now the mask, and you see it's animated now. This takes a while, and yeah, that's the normal job of a match moving artist. And I said that you normally have more than one mask. This is easy doable. You can have here another mask. For example, you tell the system, okay, it's much easier to have this part here as a separate mask. So I do that for you, only to demonstrate this has no really sense in the moment here. And now I have two masks which are animated. Now you want to use this mask for adding features. And if you now select the mask here, you see you have here an active from and to. So you can tell, okay, the mask vanishes at some point because the object is gone, which you want to mask out or whatever. And you also can tell now if you want to have features inside of the mask excluded or included. In my case, I have masked the area which I want. So I go here now and say, I want to include these here. For this mask here, I tell the system we are in 23. So for a short moment, I go here to 50. So the mask is gone for a moment. And then we can now go here and see create auto tracks. Now you see you only get features inside of this box. You see with this new enhancement in Cinema 4D R20, working with masks is now much easier because you can use your Command A, you can use your normal transformation tools inside of Cinema 4D. And like I've said, you can stack them. So let's take this here again and I reset here the value back to 0. And here is in the moment the mode exclude from mask. That means if I delete now all the tracks and make them again, you see the tracks are only here, but not there because this here stacks on top of the other mask, and so here are no trackers, or you can tell the mask, okay, I want to include here. We can delete now all the tracks and you see now they are also in this area. We can now get rid of these masks here, and we want to see first the whole process in this area. I delete all the auto tracks, 150 is okay. And let's make a really fast auto tracking. Okay, the tracking is done and you see here these little lines, which are indicators in which direction this point moves now. And like I've said, if you haven't masked things out which you don't want, you can now start to delete. But how to decide if a tracker is good or bad? There are rules like moving objects are not allowed, far away objects are bad, in patterns you normally get jumps, and so on. But to check this, we have a wonderful new feature inside of the R20 motion tracker, and this is this motion tracker window here. So let's take someone which I think is not the best one here. I want, for example, to understand what this tracker here sees. You can zoom in and try really to understand what this tracker does, but in the moment I scrub back, you see, wow, the tracker is gone because this plate here is not depending on the tracker position. That's a pity. So go back, search the tracker again. There it is. And this time I select it. And now you see in this new tracker window here, this tracker is now the center of my window. And if I now scrub around and I lose my track here, because this is in the moment deactivated, it's red. Red means the tracker is not active in the moment. But if I now come closer to this area and at some point suddenly it activates itself, now here it is, I see here the whole plate, so the context, and here I see the tracker always in the center. And the rule is your eyes as a match moving artist have to stay here on the track so that you see if you see sliding or jumping or whatever. This helps me a lot now to really check what's going on. And like I've said, if you want to get rid of something which you don't like, for example, these perspective crossing lines are not good, you can select it and delete it again. So much easier with this window here. Let's try something else. We will come back in this window again. If you have now your trackers and you have thrown away enough stuff, sometimes you want to have something automatically thrown out. And for this, we have here inside of the motion tracker this filter track area, and this is a really cool one. There are some rules which you can activate and deactivate. One rule, for example, is you can have a minimum length in the lifetime of a track. If a tracker only lives some frames, 2-3 frames, it normally is dust or reflection or something which is not really useful for the solve. And this is the minimum lifetime of a tracker. And the cool thing is, if you now look here, we have a whole bunch of trackers. If we increase now this value here, for example, to 30 frames, and you release your mouse, some of the trackers are now gone. So these trackers live shorter than 30 frames, and so they are sorted out. But don't be afraid, if you change your mind, you can lower the value again, and they are back, so they are not deleted. So if you delete them, they are gone. But here, this helps you to really try values. And you have to make sure that you don't have too low tracker amounts through the whole time. So play with caution. Then we have here an acceleration. An acceleration means suddenly a track gets extremely fast. Normally, this happens if you track, for example, a reflection. Reflections are site dependent and suddenly they fly away. And so you can tell the system, if you have a maximum acceleration of 1, no tracker is allowed to be faster than 1. But what if you really have a fast camera move going on? Then the trackers are really faster than 1. And instead of using that, I tend most of the time to use a smart acceleration. That means if suddenly a tracker decides to be really fast, Cinema first looks in the neighbor trackers. And if they all do the same, then maybe the camera is really doing it. If only one in a neighborhood is doing this, then it's deleted. So much more clever. And the last one is an error threshold. If you have then made a decent selection of your tracks, like I've said, this is only demonstration. I normally would get rid of all these trackers here. Then you go to the 3D solve, and here you have to decide the solve mode. If you have a full parallax and a full perspective scene, you can use the 3D reconstruction. If you have limited things, like for example a camera on a tripod, you can use a nodal pan. This is a special kind of solve. And you also have a planar track where you have to give camera data first to the system. But in our case, this here is full perspective. So we can use 3D reconstruction. If you have really information about the camera, you can give the system here this information. But this is also a topic for more advanced tutorials. So if you run a solver now, it takes a while. You also can look here into the status bar and zip at your coffee. After it has solved, you will see a point cloud of these features, and also you will get, hopefully, a solved camera. Now we are here. We can now go out of the motion tracker. You can select, for example, the camera and leave it here. Then you see here in the viewport your features and the moving camera. And then normally comes to check if this here makes sense. Sometimes you get solves which look nice, but they are absolutely nonsense. Yeah, for example, you have tracker behind the camera and so on. But this looks good. You see also in this color code which tracking points are reliable and which tracking points are not reliable from the perspective of the Cinema 4D solver. You see the face is good, but the foliage behind it, yeah, it's really unsure that this here makes sense. And you see that here the solution really is floating in space. The reason for this is that the 3D tracker can't decide really sizes and can't decide in which direction something is. It's only about proportion to each other. And then we normally go in and make a coordinate system. To do that, you see at the moment the camera is somewhere, the 0 point is here at the start point of the camera. And to do that now, I go back here into my solve, and to make it more clear for you, I show some of these windows so that you can see what's going on. Here's the origin point of my scene. I can now use these new buttons here, which are now in my interface, and we have 3 kind of constraints we can use: a position, a vector, and a planar constraint. The position constraint is for giving a position to a tracker, which means we can give here an origin point for the solve. So I create a position constraint, and now I click on the tracker, for example here, the tip of the nose. And in the moment I do that, you see that the whole solution here suddenly moves so that the tip of the nose is now in the 0 point of my world, which helps later my 3D process. The next constraint I, for example, can give the system is a planar constraint, which I normally use for floors or walls or whatever I want to use. So you can tell the system which axis is perpendicular to this. So we can try this. I take a planar constraint. Let's do that. And then we can start clicking here points and we get a plane. This here is not a complete plane, but I think for demonstration purposes it's enough. I want to have this point, this point, this point here. And now you see the whole solution is now rotated so that this here is now a floor plane, which doesn't make sense for my face. But I can go now onto this constraint which is generated and change the axis in which this plane looks to, for example, Z. And then you see now we look exactly on this face and the tip of the nose is the 0 point. And if you then want to change an axis, we normally use the vector constraint. You see that this new interface here helps me a lot if I want now to work fast for my first solve. I want to make now a short break here, so I delete the whole solution because now I want to show you new features in the manual tracking process, and then we come back into this scene again. Let's go into a new scene. Let's load our footage with a double-click process again. Okay, there we are. Then we go here to the resampling, reset this, 240, that's it. And then we press play to load the footage again. Okay, and now I can shorten my timeline. Normally, it's better to do it directly, but that's okay. I want to demonstrate you now the complete manual process, and I call it normally supervised tracking, but some people say it's manual tracking. It's the same. And here you see we have now a wonderful new user trackers window. And you will see that this here is really cool if you have complex shots. What does a manual tracker do? You normally set tracking marks like you do, for example, in a 2D program like After Effects. For doing that, we use here the move tool. I want to use the motion tracker all the time, so I tick this little lock here. And if you now want to set, for example, a tracking mark, I can now, with this new 2D tracks mode here into my plate, really convenient, and I want to have this red dot. I hold down my Command or Apple key on the keyboard to place this tracking mark here, and for your convenience, I lower the brightness a little bit. It doesn't affect my tracking result, but it helps you to see better what I'm doing. You see, we have two areas. We have this little area here, which is the pattern area. That's the pattern which the tracker will search. And it searches in the next or the previous frame in this area. And both you can change here to your liking. And I want to search now, for example, this area. And now you see that our new motion tracker view is really, really helpful. So also if I'm out here, you still see a really decent image what the tracker sees. And if we now go back here to the 2D tracking, you see we have now user track number 1. And this new list here is really awesome. You can select your tracker, you can rename it, for example, to nose. We see the size here and the search area. We can change this by values if you like. We have here a filter. We talk about this in a moment. We can lock a tracker which you are happy with, and you can change it to a circle. And this is useful if you have, for example, dots in a green screen studio or so, and you really want to track something circular. This is done here. If you now want to track, we have 3 buttons here. You select your track and you can track bidirectional, forward or backward. And now you can change this all the time. You will see that in a moment. I decide now, I'm in the middle of my timeline, that I want to track forward and backward at the same time. So we click manual track forward, backward. It takes now a while, but it's really fast. And then Cinema 4D has finished it. And one feature I like a lot in Cinema 4D is that it refines the tracker all the time if I change something. You want to see this? For this we need the graph view. You can open your graph view here through the menu, and normally I now search for it here. But we have now a new button, and here is the graph view. To make it easier for you, you don't see my second monitor. I can drag it into my user interface, and if you press the H key, you see this is the selected track, and here you see keyframes. And a new feature here is now that you really can see what's going on. You see if I zoom in a lot, you see I started with this key here. It's yellow because there's a keyframe, because I set the system that this pattern is the pattern I'm after. So I set a keyframe. You also see it here. And I said, search it in both directions. And now you see with these little arrows exactly what the tracker has done. And you see it tracks in this direction and this direction. While it's tracking, normally the pattern changes through lighting condition or through the angle which the camera has now on this spot here. And so normally a tracker loses its contact and then you have to refine it again. But like I've said, a really nice feature inside of Cinema 4D is the following thing. You see, I now scrub here into the red area because now he is not so sure anymore that this pattern is really the pattern I've decided through the motion blur. Yeah, it's really unsure. But now I want to help the system. I say, okay, I can give you more information and I tell you again where it is. And now I can do one of two things. I can do it in this window. I can move here, or I can nudge it by keyboard shortcuts. So if you have selected this, you can hold down your command or control key, and then you can use your arrow keys to move this point around really, really easy. Or you can move it also here if you like. Both ways are working. And with this here now, I refined the path and the pattern, because in the moment he now sees the new pattern which I'm after, Cinema 4D directly starts to go, because it's a bidirectional, in both directions and refine the result. So I don't have to delete keyframes or delete frames, go back, forward, and I have to delete again. I only need to refine. If you don't like this, you can deactivate this button, though the auto update tracks is sometimes a performance thing, but in most of my plates I leave it on because it's such a cool feature. Let's do it again. I go, for example, to this here, and he's not so sure anymore, but I touch this here and refine it. I want to have this spot, and in the moment I release, you see he retracks with the new information to this point and this point, and so he's happy. And you see how cool this way of working is. And while I'm scrubbing, I can take a look into this window, and it's really fast now to work in this new version through this window. And here I see it's a little bit off. I don't like this. So we can change here this a little bit to the inside, change the pattern, and he's refining the path again. If you're happy with this, you can lock it here so that nothing happens anymore. So you don't select it by accident and then you take the next tracker here. I take, for example, now this dot, and we can make it bigger. Sometimes light conditions are not so the best, it changes a lot, or you have the problem suddenly that you have something which is not contrasty enough. A tracker normally only sees luminance, and for that we have the color filter. In reality, this tracker only sees a black and white image. And to make this visible for you, you can tick this little tick mark in front of tracker view. If you tick this, you see in this new tracker window exactly what the tracker sees. But you still see the original plate here. Really useful. And now you can start to prepare your plate better. If you say, the contrast isn't high enough, but I don't want to go out now, I can open this color filter here and I can mix my channels, red, green and blue, so that I see here a more contrasty image. And now through this tracker view, I really can see what the tracker sees. And this is a big helper for me. And this here is now doable for every tracker. So the first nose tracker was, if I delock it, a luminance tracker with this mixing here. And if I now go to the user tracker 2, which we haven't tracked yet, it's this setting here. So you can now have for every tracker your settings so that you get the best result later. Also, we have some presets here. For example, if you have a red dot and you want to enhance the red, you can directly select this and you see the red is mixed in with 100%, the other colors are removed. Or you can overdo this with enhanced red, and then you see you also can go here to the negative and make the red more popping. So really useful, these color filters now with the control in this window here. But there's another feature I want to talk with you briefly about, and this is the virtual keyframe. I hope I have a good point here for my demonstration. Let me track this really fast, forward and backward. And what normally happens through the changing angle of the camera to a pattern is that the pattern changes. The only information the tracker has about the pattern is in the keyframes. In the moment, only this keyframe here stores the pattern. And if we now move a lot, you suddenly see that here the tracker jumps away, because this point here looks for the tracker more like my original state here. That's not the thing I'm after, and so I have to look out for these jumps and have to correct them. But if you want to have it a little bit easier for you, you can now use a new feature inside of Cinema 4D at 20, which is named a virtual keyframe. If we open this up now, you see if you tick this, you have 3 options you can work. The first option is a frame interval. So you tell the system that every 10 frames, this system looks again at the pattern at this point of time and stores it again. And you see this in these cyan keyframes. So at this point here, 10 frames away, he said, okay, I have to look onto the pattern which I have and store this here as the new pattern, and so on. And suddenly you see, it really stays here. Because every 10 frame it looks again, and we don't have to correct this anymore. There are some more intelligent uses than the frame interval. Sometimes this is good. And I, for example, like the error threshold preemptive. That means in every frame here, Cinema 4D decides how good the pattern is comparing to the original keyframe. And he says, now I'm only, for example, 90% sure. Now I'm only 85% sure. And the more it goes away from this keyframe, the error goes up. And what you do with this kind of work here, you tell the system, if your error gets higher than this threshold, make a keyframe before that. And we can tell, for example, 10%. And if you now bring this down, you see, okay, in this area here, suddenly he saw, oh, the error goes up over our threshold, and then he decided, okay, I have to make a new keyframe here to store this new value. You see, with these virtual keyframes, you are extremely fast in many manual tracking jobs, and it's a really big time saver. So that's about these virtual keyframes and the color filters. Let me close this list view here. If you have a whole bunch of trackers, also if you want to have later a reconstruction where you really can see, okay, these are trackers on the statue, these are trackers on the tree left, and these are trackers on the tree right, you can use here your right mouse button a lot. So you can have folders here if you like, and you name this, for example, left part, or whatever you want to name this. Then you can now drag your trackers into that. Like you've seen, we can lock them. And now this panel here is really an organizing tool for me. And that's the great thing about that. These are some of the new features here. To close this scene now, I want also to show you really briefly the graph mode. If you like this representation, which I do a lot because of the colors, the directions, and the kind of frames here, you will also like this. If I, for example, now use my user track here, I select only this, then you see this is the error value which this user track produces. And you can press the H key here. You see also a small representation of my keys from this list here. So we have now the best of both worlds. And you see here's the error really low because I said that's the pattern. And then you see the error goes up and down, but in most cases up. And at this point, my error was high enough. You see 0.08, and I said I have an error threshold of 0.1. And that's the reason why he made here a new virtual keyframe, and then the error drops down and goes up again. So a really nice analyzing tool. That's it for this scene. So we now go back into our original motion tracking scene. And now you also see here, these are my tracks, which we have done before. We can close this for a moment down. We have our helper here. And what Jonas has done with his original scene, he reconstructed from his result which he had produced here so that he can use the dynamic system of Cinema 4D to get a collision object and also use the scene reconstruction. And this is something I want to show you at the end of this tutorial. I go back here now to the motion tracker. I have now here my constraints going on, so let's make a really brief look into my scene, and you see it looks like that. There's the face, and this is the camera path. We say, okay, that's good enough for this demonstration. And you will see that these tracking marks are not enough, for example, for making a proxy mesh for dynamics or so. And inside of the Cinema 4D motion tracker, we can now use the reconstruction. And this reconstruction is a really cool process for generating point clouds. We have some presets here. It uses a process which is really close to photogrammetry. We have more than one camera because our camera moves, and he tries to find first more than one side of the same point, and then he generates a patch and grows the patch and generates points in this area. If you want to know more, read a little bit about this in the helpful of Cinema 4D. And with this, we can get a dense point cloud. I will do this. Normally, I first generate a point cloud, and if I'm happy with the settings of the point cloud, I then generate a mesh, and it takes a long time. So we will have a little bit of time lapse now in the video. And so I'm really going here for the high quality. I press generate point cloud, and we see in a moment again. Okay, it's finished. You see it took a while, about 3 or 4 minutes, but now you see that in my viewport now we see this big dense point cloud now of our scene, and you see how dense this point cloud can be and which great helper this is. The way Cinema 4D stores this point cloud is here a mesh, and inside of the mesh we have now points placed. So these are normal points. You can go into points mode, and if you like, you can select them inside of the viewport and delete them if you like, or use them for example, point snapping or whatever you want to do with them. And the colors here are projected from the original footage, and these colors are stored in this tag here. This is a vertex color tag, and this vertex color tag is storing the colors for every point, and you see here that the points are drawn always so that we can see the whole thing. This here is a really good helper now for 3D work, because you really see where from the perspective is something really placed. So if we need to place a car or a dinosaur between trees, you really can see where the trees are. But if you want to use dynamics, which Jonas has done in his scene, you can go even a step farther. You can generate a mesh out of this. And this here is named then generate mesh. Also, if you play with these presets for the points and so on, these objects here stay. So you have sometimes a low, mid or high quality point cloud, and also you can delete them if you want to try again. Let's finish that with the generating mesh. So now these points here are connected with the mesh so that you get here a surface which you then can use as collision objects. Normally we hide them, but it's really nice as collision objects for dynamics or shadow, catcher, and so on. And one thing which is important to mention is that even if you resampled here the footage, for example, to 75 or 50%, Cinema 4D and this process is clever enough to always use the full resolution of your footage. That's really, really cool. But now reconstruct the mesh here. So I click here again, and it will take a while again, and we will see each other when the mesh is finished. And here we are. The mesh is also generated, and it looks a little bit scary in this area here. That's because we don't have enough information about this here. But I want to deactivate first my point cloud so that you really can see what's going on. And you see that the mesh is really, really detailed in the areas where we had information. So this is a simple mesh. You can go again into polygons mode, throw away everything you don't like. But the cool thing now is that we have here now a really good representation of the surface. And you also can see the colors if you like. You also have here this color information as a vertex color tag, and you see if you activate this, this here looks really, really good, and you can use this also in a shader. Like I've said, normally we don't want to see this directly in the viewport. We use it as an hidden object. We clean it up so that we really get the connection points where we need them. But this is a really incredible workflow inside of the Cinema 4D motion tracker. That finishes my tutorial about the new features inside of the motion tracker and also a little bit about the new enhanced workflows. I hope you liked it. My name is Helge from Pixel Train. Have fun.